Hello, this is Lauren from Wearing History, and I'm explaining to you the Gina Dress pattern bodice. The rest of the Gina 1930s dress pattern is relatively straightforward, but the part where you attach the yoke and the sleeve can be a little bit challenging if you've never done something like this before, so hopefully this visual will help you understand. I'm showing you the two front pieces. Once you figure out the front, the back is pretty easy. You can see that the apron right here attaches to this curve in the bottom front. The width up here at the top is gathered between these two dots in the yoke, and these two curved seams are your underarm seam, and those get sewn together. So what you want to do first is cut out all of your pieces, and then before you remove them from the fabric, you're going to mark your dots and clip your notches. I use a pin that you can get at any craft store that comes off with water, and just clip in all your notches. Also clip center front of the bottom and center front of the yoke here and here. Make sure you mark your buttonholes, and if you're doing bound buttonholes, you're going to put them in before you do anything else. So make sure that you start your bound buttonholes before you continue. I'm going to do machine buttonholes, so I'm not going to do that. Now, just so you can see what's going on here, after you've marked everything, what I did, which is not called for in the original pattern, was interfaced half of the front. So you can see that this will fold back on itself, and that provides extra stability for the buttonholes, and I find it very beneficial. We do a lot more machine buttonholes than they did in the past. So the interfacing really helps those machine buttonholes hold their shape. Now, before we attach that part, the first steps after the bound buttonholes are to sew your shoulder seams of the yoke and the underarm seams of the yoke piece. So do that. You can see that this is the two bibs that will get turned in on themselves. And then the underarm seam here. And then on the bottom of the bodice front and back, you are going to do your underarm seams on the right side, and on the left side leave it free below the notch for your side opening. Now, I also finished these edges with serging because I'm using a modern method for seam finishing. I did that on the curves here and here because it's going to be a latch seam, and run a stay stitch around those curved edges, and you'll see why as we get to that step. But do that all to prep your fabric, and then I'll show you what to do next in just a moment. Okay, after you've prepped your pieces, you've sewn your shoulder seams, you've sewn your underarm seams, you're going to run a basting or a gathering stitch along the tops of the bodice on the front, both fronts and the back, between the two dots. Okay. Now after that, this U here that's in the front, you are going to clip in here, and then you're going to press under, and that's when I said previously to stay stitch. That's why you want your stay stitching, because you want to have a nice line to put that up to and a guide for when you are pressing under. Now the reason why you want to press under this instead of pressing under the other curve, because I usually do the outside curve, I will turn under instead. But the reason why is because of the opening here at center front. If this was going up and then you attached it at the join there, you would see this seam allowance. So you want all the seam allowance to be going down. That way you won't see any join here at center front. So go ahead and press that under, and then we'll do the next step. I just quickly want to show you the wrong side of the fabric. Now that I've pressed it under, you can see where I've clipped it. Now this clip right here is center front. So make a mental note, or even place a little pin or something there and be like, okay, this is my center front. This is what I match with the bodice. Okay, so now that you've done that, press under your facings. Now if you're doing the version 1 with the ruffles, you will have this separate facing, and I go through that in the instructions. For my version, I'm doing version 2, so you'll see the seamless pressed under. This is just a quick view of the facings to under. I said seam allowance, I meant facings in the last section. Anyways, I wanted to say that a personal note is that I did a little tack right here at the bottom because I have stripes that have different colors, and I don't want it to shift like this or like this when I'm sewing. So just a little tack down there on my machine will help those to stay pretty even, because you'll notice it if you get shifted. You don't want it to look like that when it could look like perfectly smooth. So just yeah, do that little tack. This is the wrong side. Here's the wrong side of the fabric. So here's the facings turned under. And the right side of the fabric is like this. Now you're going to grab the part you just did with turning under the curve. And you are going to match that. So you've got your center front mark that you did, like I mentioned, the little clip. You want to match that turned under part exactly to the stitch line. And let me get in closer so that you can see what I'm talking about here. All right. So here's the bottom. Here is your center front with that clip that you made. And then you are going to match that center front with that. Right there, you're going to match your turned under part to the part that you stay stitched at exactly your seam allowance, and you're going to pin it smoothly all the way around, and then you're going to top stitch it. I'm going to show you it after I have it pinned. Okay, here I have it pinned to the front. As I was mentioning, it goes center front matched. Make sure that your stripes are matched across the front. You can wiggle this a little bit when you need to as you sew if you go slow right there. But the part that you really need to make sure you do is, if I zoom in right here, you can see that there are these dots here and there that you should have marked with your pin. You want to start and stop your stitching at those dots. You don't want to go up in here because this needs to be free to get turned under into your yoke. So I'll kind of show you how that happens. So that will get turned under and attached like that. And you want this seam allowance going up, right? This seam allowance is going down, this way out. So yeah, don't sew past that dot. It's really important, or else you're going to give yourself a headache later. So you're going to go really slowly and top stitch closely to the folded edge here, all the way around. Go slow down at the bottom to make sure that if you have a stripe like mine, that your stripes don't get all wobbly on you. And just go from the dot all the way around the curve to the other dot. And then you're going to stop your stitching. And make sure to back stitch too. Okay. Here's the front all sewn. So I have top stitched this to this. You might see that you have a couple of rows of stitching. If you look really closely right here, there's like the one that attaches it, and then there's my stay stitching. You can go back and unpick that later if you want to, and just give it a nicer clean finish. So if you aren't sewing along, you might want to make yourself a note to not do a teeny tiny stitch for your stay stitch line, because it's mostly like a guide. And it's worth noting here that I realized that I should have stay stitched for a guide on my front yoke at the top on each side and across the back as well. So go ahead and do that now. Doesn't have you do it in the original instructions. I just find it a lot easier than eyeballing it or using a seam gauge. So the next step after you've finished sewing the front, and remember this is free right here, there should not be attached right at those dots, is you are going to sew your underarm seam. Now here's your underarm of the bodice. You can see that it's got like a U shape, right? Now the underarm of your sleeve should have the same U shape like this, right? Here's your shoulder seam and your underarm seam. Now match your underarm seam of your sleeve, side seam here, to the side seam or underarm seam of the bodice. I find it easiest if you go in through the bodice side instead of through the sleeve side. So that means that the smaller part that you're attaching is on the inside, and the bigger piece that you're attaching is on the outside. Then when you you pin them together, matching those two seams, it's easier to maneuver this smaller piece when it's inside your sewing machine like this, instead of underneath and fighting with it, right? I hope that makes sense to you. So pin your underarm seam matching your side, matching your underarm seam here, and then you are going to find that there should be another dot on this one. You're going to match those 2 points together and pin there, and then you're going to match the 2 points together on the other side and pin there. So it'll be a U-shaped seam. Start at the dot and end at the dot. Same thing, you want that seam allowance of the yoke to be free. Okay? Hope this is making sense. So pin that and then sew that, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished being sewn. Alright, I've just finished sewing my underarm seams. So you can see here is the yoke at the front. This is free. That's where you're going to gather it in. And the underarm seam is sewn on both sides. And on the back, it'll look like this because you haven't attached this yet. So front view on the side, it's like a U shape. See? And there's your sleeve opening. A U shape. And then on the inside, it's going to look like this, with a U shape, starting at the dot, around, and finishing at the dot. Alright, now the next part is you are going to turn under your yoke. So the stay stitching that I mentioned in the last video, or the one before last, you're going to turn this under and press it. Okay, so do that for the fronts. Turn that under and press it. If you clipped it where the instructions said to clip it, it's marked on your pattern, then that should be really easy to turn under. And the idea now is that those gathering stitches that you ran earlier, you're going to pull those edges in and you're going to evenly space them and make that bigger piece fit the yoke. And then you just pin carefully and top stitch that as you did with this. Okay, so let me press those under and start pinning and you'll see what I mean. Okay, I'm working on one of the fronts right now. So I just pressed under that top yoke and you can see the extra fabric here, right? It's bigger. When you're pulling your gathering threads, you're really supposed to run two. I get lazy and usually gather one. Don't be like me. You pull up one thread and you'll see that this gathers. If you're an intermediate sewer, you should already know this technique, because that's how you usually set a set-in sleeve. Of course, these are not set-in sleeves, but you're using that technique again. So you see I'm kind of gathering them across as I go to ease it in. You want your gathers evenly spaced. Now, when you got it pretty close to what you want, I want you to turn that on towards the inside. And if you turned and clipped on that dot, you should have no fraying here, because you should have clipped closely but not really far. Now if you did clip too far, you might want to see if you can fix it with a little bit of fray check. This is another reason why making a mock-up before sewing the final one is very important, because you want to try all these techniques before you mess up your good fabric if you're learning new techniques. Alright, so you see another smooth finish here with no fraying. Pin that. Now that I've got those two edges in there, I've still got my little tail here. I'm going to pull this up to fit, and you can see that that fits really nice and flush. Sorry, I was off camera a little. And you are going to just pin that, and then you can ease them across as you need to. Pin that. Do the same on the other side, and then do the same on the back. Now the back is the same idea, but it's a much longer amount to go. And make sure you match center back and the notches on the back. That'll help you to gather and figure out where the placement goes. Now after this, I'm going to start stitching here, back stitch, go close to the folded edge, all the way to here, and back stitch. Okay, so do that, and then we'll come back and see how it looks. Okay, I've sewn it, so you can see that this is facing, this top is facing under, and I stitched it right along that fold. I've done both sides. You can see here and across the back. Now remember, when you're doing the back, match the notches, match center back, match the notches, and do the same type of thing that you did on the front, on the back, lots of threads. Okay, now on the inside, if you want to take a look at what that looks like, it should look like this on the front. So there's my, I'm going closer, there's my facing, there's my gathered to the yoke. You can see this faces up, and there is my underarm seam, yoke, and front bib. Okay, and across the back, that seam allowance is facing up. I really hope that this tutorial has helped you visualize how this pattern goes together. That's the most difficult part. After this, you attach the collar like you usually do and cuffs like you usually do, and the skirt's pretty straightforward. So I hope that helps you figure out how to do it, and hopefully you've learned a few new tricks. All right, thanks very much. You can get the pattern on wearinghistory.clothing or Wearing History on Etsy. All righty, thanks.